Hello there, this is James Oscroft, who knows 1978, and leaving aside the fact that the Conservative Party is currently tearing itself apart and shooting itself in both kneecaps over Brexit, as the dogmatic Brextremists and political opportunists continue to deny and rage against the reality of things such as the economy and the situation in Northern Ireland, because that's like devoting an entire video to how the Green Party still prioritises the environment. Duh. Having originally made a video shortly after the referendum declaring that Brexit could never and thus would never happen, naively assuming that the Tories would never be able to let their bigoted dogma and selfish obsession with clinging to power get in the way of reality, and then making a much more recent video grudgingly accepting that Brexit has to happen because too many billionaire media moguls and other wealthy powermongers, along with their bought and paid for Conservative Party puppets, have spent too many decades and far too many millions of pounds convincing white working class voters in particular, but not exclusively, that immigrants and the EU are the sole cause of everything wrong with Britain. And on top of that, having up until recently hoped that Brexit would be dealt with one way or the other before the next general election, in the hopes of avoiding a repeat of 2016 with too many millions of butthurt whingers who would otherwise and should vote Labour, refusing to do so because of their hashtag principles, thus allowing the Tories to form another government and push through the worst possible Brexit anyway. I'm now coming to realise that even if and when we do ever leave the European Union, in inverted commas, Brexit will never be over, dealt with, or otherwise behind us in any way, shape, form or fashion, at least until most Brexiteers either get over their insecure Whiteboi syndrome or simply die of old age, because ultimately Brexit never had anything to do with leaving the European Union at all. Instead, no different from Make America Great Again, while a significant minority of those who voted Leave did so because they made a rational decision based upon an objective analysis of the evidence, being sure to include that caveat so that the British equivalents of the self-righteous scum who voted for Trump solely because Hillary hurt their delicate feelings by calling them deplorables don't get shirty again. The Brexit vote was merely another manifestation of insecure white boy syndrome, throwing a petrol bomb at Cameron, the establishment, the elite, the immigrants, the EU, the leftists who hurt their delicate feelings by calling them stupid, ignorant and racist, and everyone and everything else that makes them feel confused, angry and scared. But the number one reason that people gave for voting Leave was national sovereignty, demanding that laws which affect this country be made in this country. Yes, and the southern states claimed that they seceded from the Union and then, having been forced to repatriate after losing the Civil War, imposed Jim Crow laws and a century later fought tooth and nail against the black civil rights movement in the name of, quote, states' rights. And today, not homophobes and not transphobes honest condemn protections for Mogai individuals in the name of religious freedom, while not racists and not Islamophobes honest in Britain demand that the government free Tommy Robinson in the name of hashtag freeze peach. Because never forget that while there are always genuine free speech advocates, religious freedom advocates, states' rights advocates, or what have you, who sincerely believe that they are fighting for their principles because they are too willfully ignorant, too gullible, or too stupid to understand that they are being used as token puppets by bigots who've turned such principles into buzzwords in order to exploit them as dog whistle euphemisms, the driving force of the movement is never simply the defense of free speech, religious freedom, fighting Islamic extremism, or what have you. Instead, the goal is always protecting and expanding straight white cis male supremacy. And bearing that in mind, how exactly was voting for Trump or Brexit ever going to achieve that in practice? What detailed plan did these movements have to achieve their goals beyond build that wall, lock her up, drain the swamp, and take back control? That's like asking a high school shooter how he thought that murdering his classmates and teachers was ever supposed to help him lose his virginity. Because as I explained in the first video in what has turned out to be this mini-series, links down as your underbar, there is no logic, method or ideological centre, only resentment, bitterness, self-righteous defensiveness, fear of the unknown, rage and flame. Taking this all the way back around to the beginning then, and explaining how this means that no Brexit deal will ever give most Brexiteers what they want, and will only further mobilise and enrage Remainers, the reason for that is because no different from most Trump voters, in logical, rational and concrete terms, most Brexiteers honestly don't have a single clue what they actually want, beyond for everything to be like the utopia that never existed, in which no white boy was ever made to feel uncomfortable. Meaning that no matter what deal the government eventually strikes, whoever is Prime Minister or whichever party is in power when that happens, UKIP or some other not racist and not xenophobic honest party will indeed keep coming back like the Black Death, to the horror of the billionaire media moguls and other members of the 1% who spent millions baiting the mob simply because they wanted to avoid the EU's new crackdown on tax dodging, only to learn the hard way like the rich and powerful conservative elite of Weimar Germany, or those who support the Republican Party in the US and handed power to Hitler and Trump respectively because they arrogantly assumed that they could exploit those demagogues' angry white boy mobs for their own ends. The amorphous rage of insecure white boys can never be controlled and will never die down unless the white boys eventually choose to get over themselves. Because as I explained in the much older video also linked down to Underbar, as a result of always defining your tribe by what they're not rather than what they are, as in if you're not with us then you're against us, tribalism is built upon the ignorant, self-righteous and bigoted conceit that the other, in inverted commas, is the cause of all of the tribe's problems, and that therefore, if only they could be dealt with by whatever means, then everything would be perfect, with the only problem in that cunning plan being that reality simply doesn't work that way. That, as I neglected to mention in the second video in this series linked below because I assumed that it was obvious, no matter how many Jews you exterminate, refugee children you cage, or misogynistic and homophobic bigots you nominate to the Supreme Court, the progress that insecure white boys hate and fear because it makes them feel uncomfortable always keeps on happening. And from raging about immigrants, Muslims, Jews, the authoritarian left, SJWs, feminazis, China, the elite and the EU, to moral panics over video games and not racist and not misogynistic nerd rage over the new Star Wars movies, they are all merely the impotent tantrums of insecure white boys and their token supporters being stirred up into a frenzy by obscenely rich badger molesters who manipulate their outrage in order to become even more disgustingly rich. But no, not Trump, because he's merely another angry and insecure white boy puppet who's up to his ridiculous hair in Russian debt. Wannabe puppet masters who, like a businessman who burns down his own building for the insurance, when he tries to apply the same tactics to national politics that worked so well when he used them to further incite moral panic or attacks against the boogeymen of SJWs, watches with horror as the flames rage out of control and burn down the entire sodding planet.
Rockstar swiftly recalled, patched and reissued the game, and the mature rating was promptly restored. But if the history of moral panics has taught us anything, it's that complying with the moral panic is the least effective way to end it. It's showing weakness, isn't it? It's like saying to the frenzied shark, if you promise not to bite all my arms and legs off, you can have this used tampon. Lawsuits got underway, Clinton introduced the Family Entertainment Protection Act to federally enforce the ESRB ratings that would ultimately flounder like an armadillo in a ball pit, but it wasn't enough. Still brimming with huffy energy and not wanting to admit that this was all rooted in general frustration at losing control of a changing world and having nothing else to do all day but pick the kids up from soccer practice and shag the pool cleaner, the Moral Guardians extended their rage to Rockstar's next title, Bully, a slightly quaint game about a rascally schoolboy, which they decided, sight unseen, was some kind of loving tribute to the Columbine murderers. In perhaps the most hilarious episode of the time, a group apparently unironically calling themselves the Peace Holics organised a protest at Rockstar's headquarters, even issuing a list of demands, which is worth googling if you could do with a laugh, because their demands basically amount to immediately sabotage your own business and admit responsibility for all human suffering and wrongdoing. I can't seem to find any information on what the Peace Holics were threatening to do if their demands weren't met. Presumably they were going to get real fucking peaceful on these motherfuckers. I think it's fair to say that hot coffee wouldn't happen today, as publishers would be able to digitally patch it out before Carl Johnson had finished his first crudely animated thrust. Any controversy about locked content on the disc is more likely to centre around publishers trying to flog it as DLC. But in the aftermath of insert name of currently most relevant American mass school shooting, we ask ourselves why the video game moral panic never seems to permanently go away. Who ultimately was hurt by hot coffee and benefited from Rockstar's chastisement? Well, we don't need to speculate, we have stats. In 2007, the class action lawsuit was settled and Take-Two agreed to pay every offended customer enough money to buy a slap-up McDonald's meal for one. But as of June 2008, less than 2,700 people had made a claim. Oh, how shocking, said the 11 law firms that have been drawing the case out. Guess people just aren't as committed to taking a moral stand as they used to be. Gosh, is that the time on my suspiciously expensive Rolex? Gotta run. So yeah, if you want to know why moral panics drag on, it's because somewhere, somehow, a shadowy cunt is making shitloads of money from it. Basically the same reason there's still a DC cinematic universe.
Thanks for listening, and if you'd like to support my channels, then the link to my new Patreon page is listed down as your underbar, or if a one-off donation rather than a monthly pledge is more suitable for you, then the link to my tip jar, aka my paypal.me page, is also linked below. Just think of it as me holding out my busker's hat at the end of the performance.